Welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on how to prepare for the single audit. This is part 2 of a 2-part webinar presented by Mays & Associates. If you missed part 1, you can watch it on YouTube. Just search for our webpage. This presentation will also be available on YouTube for later viewing. There will also be instructions at the end of the webinar on how to obtain CPE certificates for the live attendance. Please keep in mind that we are not going over all aspects of preparing for the single audit. We've just selected what we deem significant for the purpose of the session. You should discuss this topic with your internal accounting staff and, of course, your external auditors, as not all of these scenarios are applicable in all situations. This webinar will be moderated by Mark Wong and I. Mark Wong is an audit partner of the firm with 19 years municipal experience. He will be fielding your questions today. And my name is Nikki Apora. I'm a supervisor with the firm with 7 years experience. I'll be presenting today's session. So what we'll cover today is basically how to prepare for a single audit. How does the update affect the audit? In the first session, we went over the new single audit updates, also known as the uniform guidance. And here in this session today, we will discuss how the update will affect your audit and just best practices. So we'll go over the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, also known as the SEFA, and the important grant dates, which will basically answer your question of, do I use the old OMBs or the new uniform guidance? We'll also go over internal controls. No new updates for this topic, but there's more of an emphasis. And subrecipient monitoring and procurement standards. Now these are the biggest changes under the new uniform guidance, so we'll go over that in detail here. And just to touch bases on, we'll provide a brief summary of the implementation on the uniform administration requirements, the cost principles, and audit requirement for federal awards. What we'll also cover are the different resources that you have to prepare for your single audit. First and foremost, of course, is the grant agreement or agreements. The old OMBs, there are 8 circulars. One we're very all familiar with is the A133. Also, there's A87 and A110, etc. And there's also the new uniform guidance. We also want to introduce to you, if you're not already familiar, the compliance supplement. As auditors, we use this as one of the driving forces in auditing your single audit program. And we'll go over other things to consider during your audit, ensuring that your checklist is complete. We want to go over how to address findings, both current and prior year, and what is a state controller's office report or a CSO report. We'll go over that shortly. So before we dive in, I'd like to talk about the change in audit thresholds. So currently, for fiscal year 2015, the audit threshold is for expenditures over $500,000. Beginning for audits, fiscal year beginning on or after December 26, 2014, which means calendar year end 2015, and for those June 30 year ends, it'll begin fiscal year 2016. The expenditures increased to $750,000. So for those who are expending less than $750,000 at the end of fiscal year 16, you are no longer required to complete a compliance audit, but they may require you to make records available for review. So here on slide 8, I have two pictures, one of the old OMB. OMB, if I did not mention earlier, it's the Office of Management and Budget, which consists of 8 circulars. These circulars are the driving force of how to with the compliance audit. And the second image is a cover shot of the new uniform guidance, or here it's also mentioned as the Federal Register or the CFR. So the update, as we discussed in webinar session number 1, the update is now took the 8 circulars and streamlining them into the Federal Register or the new uniform guidance. What this does, it eliminates any non-duplicative and non-conflicting verbiage, so everything is all located in one document. I've provided links at the bottom for you to gain access to get a copy of the Federal Register. So which resources do you use, or which compliance document do you use? Here are some of the effective dates that hopefully will make that clear. For federal agencies, by December 26, 2014, they must implement these policies and procedures by placing into effect the new uniform guidance regulations. And for non-federal entities, you will need to implement the new administrative requirements and principles for all new federal awards and to additional funding to existing awards on or after December 26, 2014. So if you have a grant agreement that was dated November 1st, 2014, your compliance would fall under the old OMB rules. And for those that have grant agreements, let's just say dating January 1st, 2015, you would fall under the new uniform guidance rules. So a summary of the key changes to the uniform guidance. I'll go over compensation and indirect costs requirements briefly here on slide 10. In regards to compensation, the changes and emphasis that was directed under the uniform guidance is that that actual time should be charged to federal grants and not budget. However, if budget time is used to account for time charged to federal grants, adjustments should be made to gain accurate and correct time charged. And also maintain records. That means maintaining your timesheets or your payroll registers within your reimbursement requests, or just to have them on site and available. Also, there were changes to the indirect cost requirements. For those federal grants that have already negotiated indirect cost rate, there is a one-time extension up to 4 years. You don't have to renew this annually or negotiate this annually. But for those who have not negotiated an indirect cost rates, the uniform guidance has now provided a de minimis rate of 10% of modified total direct costs, and this is basically for those non-federal entities that have not negotiated in a indirect cost rate, and it's just a simple calculation. We go over this in webinar 1, so like I mentioned before, you can access this on YouTube to get an example of how to calculate this de minimis rate. So the big changes I've mentioned earlier to the uniform guidance are the subrecipient monitoring management and the procurement standards. Under the subrecipient monitoring and management, the uniform guidance is now requiring an evaluation of each subrecipient's risk of noncompliance. We call this a risk assessment. We'll go over how to evaluate a subrecipient's risk in just a moment. There are also new subaward requirements, and we'll touch base on this as well. And there's also a slight presentation change to the SEFA. Under the procurement standards, there are 5 procurement methods under the uniform guidance. I'll go over those briefly as well. But also the federal agencies have allowed a one full year grace period for this implementation. So please keep that in mind. So the first thing I'd like to go over on how to prepare for the single audit is just to discuss the presentation and the preparation for the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, or SEFA. So this is the auditor's responsibility. As a firm, Mays and Associates, we can assist you in preparing the SEFA, but again, ultimately, this is the auditor's or management responsibilities. So some things to consider are, does this conform to the old OMB or the new uniform guidance requirements? I've included here the section in both documents so you can reference to it. Are all the programs identified by the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance number, or what we call a CFDA number? I know there are many instances where the CFDA number has been communicated, but the actual official title related to that CFDA is not provided, just maybe the project name. There is a website that we as a firm use to correctly identify the CFDA number. It's actually cfda.gov. You can use this to find out what the official program title is and include that on your SEFA. Remember that you are required to present the program's name and correctly identify the program on the SEFA. Is your program director indirect? If it's an indirect award, has the pass-through entity, or PTE, and the pass-through number identified and been included? So what you want to do here is look at your grant agreement to make sure that you have your pass-through entity's information and number. However, if you don't have a number and you've communicated with your pass-through entity to try and obtain this information but was unsuccessful, you can always present not applicable or NA on the SEFA. And another thing to consider are your programs, cluster programs. If you're not familiar with a cluster program, what that is, it's a grouping of closely related programs that share common program requirements. Just for example, some of you may be familiar with the Department of Transportation Highway Planning and Construction Program, CFDA 20.205. So this program is actually part of a cluster called the Highway Planning and Construction Cluster. So what this cluster includes with CFDA 20.205 is 20.219, it's the Recreational Trail Program, and CFDA number 23.003, the Appalachian Development Highway. I'm sure it's safe to say that many of us attending here today is California and Bay Area based and haven't seen this last CFDA program, but if you've received 20.205 and 20.219, you would want to disclose these grants as a cluster program on the face of your SEFA. So I've provided here a example of the SEFA. As you notice at the top, it says Department of ABC Direct Programs, and underneath you'll have the program name, and it's actually the agency program name. You would put here the federal CFDA number. If it's since it's not a pass-through, then you would leave this column blank, and then of course the expenditures for the fiscal year. And below, if there were any ARA funds, ARA expenditures, then you would include that there. But as we all know, ARA is winding down, so you may not need this line. And then below that, we have the same Department of ABC pass-through program. So you would have to actually separate direct and pass-through programs if they're from the same department. And here we have underneath that line is the pass-through entity name, and in this example it's from the state of California. And halfway down, you see that there are, we use an example of a cluster program. So you would put the name of the cluster and then follow as such the same format as above. And your total below would be the total name of the cluster. In the end, of course, you would have the total expenditures of federal awards. Also notice that there is a column for expenditures to subrecipients. This is one of the new requirements under the new uniform guidance. I've also noted that, put a note here, it's beginning fiscal year 2016. Some of you right now may include your expenditures to subrecipients as a footnote disclosure. That is that's allowable for fiscal year 15, but starting fiscal year 16, you should disclose your expenditures to subrecipients on the face of your SEFA. So how does the update affect the audit? Of course, we'll go over again the grant dates, which will allow you to determine whether or not your grant is under the old OMB or the new uniform guidance. We'll also go over internal controls and the importance of internal controls. And again, subrecipient monitoring and the procurement standards. Grant dates. So which grants do you use? Well, grants award date before December 26, 2014, your compliance is subject to the old OMBs. For anything after December 26, 2014, your compliance is under the new uniform guidance. Well, did you receive a subaward as a subrecipient? That's another question that you need to ask yourself. The grant period, the grant date of the original award is what drives the determination of whether it falls under the old OMB or the new OMB. So if the original federal grant award was dated before December 26, 2014, then the compliance is subject under to the old OMBs. But if the original federal award date is after December 26, 2014, then your compliance is subject to the new uniform guidance. So an example that I gave out in webinar, in the first session of our webinar, was if City of Disneyland was awarded a federal grant November 1st, 2014, and passed through the grant monies to City of Universal January 1st, 2015, which compliance is it subject to? Well, because the original award date was November 1st, 2014, which is prior to the December 26th date, then the compliance is actually subject to the old OMB. So I hope that's clear. So internal controls is an important component in accounting and auditing. This was emphasized in the uniform guidance. So non-federal entities must establish and maintain effective internal control over the federal award that provides reasonable assurance that the non-federal entity is managing the federal award in compliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of federal awards. Essentially, are there controls in place that ensures the expenditures are allowable? Have the reimbursement requests been reviewed and approved prior to filing with the federal agencies? And has the non-federal entity taken any prompt action when instances of non-compliance have been identified, including audit findings? And does the non-federal entity take reasonable measures that confidential and or sensitive material have been safeguarded? Other components to internal controls that auditees should focus on are the segregation of duties. We talked about if with payroll is the same person that is processing payroll also approving the registers. Monitoring and reporting, have reimbursements reports been reviewed and compared to expenditures and ensure that expenditures are allowable? Are there proper documentation provided in your single audit file? So essentially your goal here is to receive an unqualified opinion with no findings. So far, are there any questions?
Okay, first question here. It says that you mentioned segregation of duties, and you also give some example. What other examples can you provide? So, okay, I have one example that I'm going to bring up is a reimbursement request. So, example, reimbursement request, for example, usually we would like to see an ideal situation is where one employee's duty will be to prepare the reimbursement request for the federal award, and then a second employee who can be the program or grant manager who reviews the reimbursement request to make sure that all the expenditures claimed under the under that federal award are accurate and allowable. So, and how this is done. So the grant manager, because the grant manager usually is very familiar with the grant application. So typically, when reviewing the reimbursement request, he can compare the expenditures and the supporting document compare it against the original grant application and the grant budget when it was submitted to the grantor, to make sure that it's allowable and in the applicable correct period, and that if salaries are charged, that they are all they're charged to the correct time period. Okay, another question here. I read the new CFR 200 and the 2015 compliance supplement, and they use the term period of performance. My question here is this referring to the same compliance requirement as in the OMB's period of availability? The answer is yes. So the new 2015 compliance supplement and the uniform guidance, they now use the term period of performance. So this is exactly the same as the as period of availability. It both refer to the same item. Okay, and so now I have this question that from our first session that which I think is very helpful, and I want to bring it up. The question is, I have heard the term I have heard the term super circular being used. Is this the same as uniform guidance? The answer is yes. So basically, yes, the term super circular, the term uniform guidance, and the term CFR, all these three terms are all referring to the same document. Okay, another example, another question here I have is, can you also provide an example on monitoring and reporting? So, okay, the answer is for internal control on monitoring. Basically, okay, so I'm going to use period of performance requirement as an example. So almost all grant requirements have a period of performance term in there, and what this period of performance means is it's referring to the start date and the end date of allowable activities that can be charged to the federal award. So for monitoring, this is what I would do. So for monitoring, you will want to monitor the projects to make sure that the expenses and activities that are incurred during this period of performance. So you do not want to start your activities before the start date of the period of performance, and you do not want to have any expenses incurred or any activities that occur after the end of the period of performance. And this is very important because and we have seen it before. So okay, another example for monitoring I will use is the Department of Justice grants. So this Department of Justice grant typically has restrictions on the position of police officers that you can charge under this grant, and also the number of police officers that you can charge to the grant. So as part of the monitoring, you will want to make sure that the city is charging the correct number of police officers, and to make sure that it's that the titles of the police officers are correct, and that also that the salary or payroll of the police officers that are charged to the grant are within the period of performance. And I just want to quickly have a 1-minute discussion to talk about what is good internal control for reporting. So for reporting, first one, before you even start the monitoring, you want to read the grant agreement first and list out all the reporting requirements and the due dates. So that way you can make sure that all the performance reporting or financial reporting that are required to be submitted are submitted timely. Lastly, I have example. There's also example of What is an example of documentation? Okay, an answer of a example of good documentation can be as simple as having both preparer and reviewer sign off on a reimbursement request. So basically, this shows. So by just having the signature and the dates of both the preparer and the reviewer, it shows that there's a segregation of duties, that there is a review and approval of the reimbursement request. And another example for a good documentation is having an accurate timesheet showing that the correct employees are charging the correct time and hours to the federal award. So I think that's all I have. So I'm going to give it back to Nikki.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I keep mentioning the big change for the subrecipient monitoring and management. Just to keep in mind, and if you see an asterisk here on slide 20, that the changes are for federal awards subject to the new uniform guidance. So what the big change is that each pass-through entity or PTE should evaluate each subrecipient's risk of non-compliance and document this as such. And this is done yearly and for each subrecipient's risk of non-compliance. So basically it's the update is putting more requirements or pushing more of the requirements onto the PTE. So basically the accountability relies within the PTE and their processes, and as we talked about earlier, their proper internal controls, such that that they are in place to ensure federal funds are passed through the subrecipients, that these funds are spent appropriately. So how do you evaluate the risk of non-compliance? Well, we went over this during session number 1, but here are just a few of suggestions that the uniform guidance provided. Subrecipients experience with the same or similar awards, the results of a previous audit, were there any findings, and whether the subrecipient has new personnel or substantially changed systems. This will probably affect the internal controls. Are they familiar with spending grant monies? Are there systems in place to ensure that that the grant monies are being spent appropriately, and the extent and results of the federal awarding agency monitoring. Again, the risk of noncompliance or the evaluation of the subrecipient's risk of noncompliance should be for federal funds or federal awards subject to the new uniform guidance. So after you've assessed the risk of noncompliance and documented, and you can document your assessment and include that in your subrecipient's file, there are other factors to consider. Consider imposing specific conditions within your subaward, depending on what your risk assessment evaluation came out to be, and change up or customize your monitoring activities to that particular subrecipient. Should you do more monitoring visits? Should you include components in their monitoring to determine what their activities are? And verify whether each subrecipient has been audited. Were there any findings within that report? And also consider whether the results of the subrecipient's audits or on-site reviews or other monitoring activities indicate conditions that necessitate adjustments to your own records. And consider taking enforcement action against non-compliant subrecipients. Should you withhold reimbursements until any non-compliant issues have been mediated? There are also new subaward requirements. These components here on slide 23 are a few that was indicated in the uniform guidance, and it's also continued on to slide 24. And note that the last bullet point indicates that a pass-through entity is now required to communicate an indirect cost rate for the federal award, and including if there's a de minimis rate charged. And again, we won't go over that in this session, but you can refer back to session number 1 to determine what is a de minimis rate. So the only SEFA change in terms of the new uniform guidance is just to include the expenditures to subrecipients. I mentioned this before in the earlier slides, but all that there is just an additional column on your SEFA. Some of you currently have it disclosed as a footnote, and that's okay for fiscal year 15, but for fiscal year 16, June 30th, 16, or for those who have a calendar year end date, this is effective December 31st, 2015, you would need to disclose your expenditures to subrecipients on the face of your SEFA. Any questions?
Okay, I have a question here. On slide 25, I see that the second column where it says federal CFDA number. What is the CFDA? And second thing also relating to CFDA, I have a grant agreement with a state, and the agreement says that it has federal funds. However, there is no CFDA number in it. What do I do? Okay, the answer is CFDA stands for Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance. So basically what this CFDA numbers does is that it is an identification number used by the federal agencies and external auditors so that we can look it up and so that we know what are the particular compliance requirements that are involved in the federal award or your federal program. So, okay, so on the second question, it says, however, if there's no CFDA number in the grant agreement, what do I do? So, so first thing I would do is, if you have a federal award agreement, a federal program agreement, And if there's no CFDA number, first thing I would do is to contact your grantor. So it can be, you know, a very common situation is when we see that quite a few pass-through federal award agreements that comes from a state to the city, sometimes they do not contain any CFDA number. So the first thing you do is to email your contact person from the state. That way, you know, to find out what CFDA number. But if there's still, if your contact person still does not know what the CFDA number is, you can go to this website. There's a website called cfda.gov, and in that website you can type in the words or the program description from your grant agreement and try to see if you can find a CFDA number. And lastly, single audit rules under the new CFR or under the old OMB says that basically if you do not know what the CFDA number is, you can put basically the first two numbers is the number for the agency, so those are easy to know. A good example, let's say if it's from a federal Department of Transportation grant, usually it's a 20. 20 stands for federal Department of Transportation, and then you will put 20.xxx, meaning that that means that the last three digits are not available. So and that is acceptable. Next thing, the next question, it says that for subrecipient risk assessments and subrecipient monitoring, are there items that we must have? Also, are there examples or a list that I can use? So okay, so first question say and the first question for items that are masked. So basically, when you are reading the CFR 200, you will come across words that says must and words that say should. So basically, AICPA, GAQC, which is the Government Audit Quality Center, has clarified that in a CFR 200, must is required. So you'll be required to have that, whereas should means best practice. So you do not have to have it, but if you do not have that, then our suggestion is that you should have something that's kind of similar. So okay, and then in terms of example for listing, CFR 200.331 provides an excellent listing for items that you can consider. So we suggest that you go to CFR 200.331 and you look at a listing and you use those as checklist items for each of your subrecipient file. So in the CFR 200.331, there are listings that you can use for monitoring. There are listings that you can use for risk assessment, and then lastly, there are listings that you can use for sub-award information to be communicated to your subrecipient. So if you keep all those checklists in your subrecipient files, and each time when you go out to visit your subrecipient or when you monitor them, you can just put your note or check mark or however you like, and that covers you both. That covers the documentation, and that also covers that to show that you have complied with subrecipient monitoring requirements. Okay, that's all the questions I have right now. Back to Nikki.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, so procurement standards, I'll go over this quickly. The uniform guidance has now emphasized the implementation of the 5 procurement methods. Please keep in mind that that the federal government is also allowing one full fiscal year grace period for compliance for these methods, and that's up until December 26, 2015. And also, if you as an entity have a more restrictive policy, then it might be best that you utilize that method. And again, this should be discussed with your internal accounting team and also your external auditors. But the 5 methods that were provided under the uniform guidance was the micro purchases, small purchases, sealed bids, competitive proposals, and the sole source method. So these are the 5 methods under the new procurement standards. So there are questions about implementing these policies as the city's procurement policy and procedure. Bear in mind that these are also these methods here are for federal awards. Again, if your policy is more restrictive, then maybe using that policy is in your best interest. But there's also a suggestion that to implement these policies would streamline the city's policy and procedure as well, both federal and for normal day-to-day business operations. Any questions so far?
Okay, I think I have one question here. So it says, since the procurement has been provided a grace period by the federal government till December 26, 2015, do we need to do anything for the current fiscal year 2015? So, okay, the answer is that what AICPA has mentioned is that basically because this is a grace period item, meaning that it's optional, they have mentioned that it should be documented that you have decided to take advantage of the grace period. And the second item that I want to mention related to this December 26, 2015 is that, so even if the procurement, because although the procurement is not effective until December 26, 2015, right now currently you would want to plan for the effective date, meaning that you probably want to look at your current procurement policy and make changes to the current procurement policy if needed to make sure that when December 26, 2015 comes around, your procurement standards for those federal awards will be in compliance. And I think that's it. Back to Nikki.
So what are your resources as an auditee? Of course, the 3 main items I think about are first and foremost your grant agreement or grant agreements, and any addendums related to that grant program. The uniform guidance, and remember I provided a link on how to obtain a copy of it, and also the compliance supplement. I mentioned that the compliance supplement is something that us auditors use as one of our driving forces to test a single audit program, but we also provide this to our clients. It is a public document, and so AICPA also suggests that as an auditee that this is a great guide and resource. So we'll go over the three resources here. So in regards to the grant agreement, I guess, like I mentioned before, it's a driving force and the base of the compliance requirements and standards. What's noted in your grant agreement should be, again, the components of grant, who the grantor is, who the grantee is, the CFDA number and program title, the purposes of the grant, and what is allowable under the grant program. Now, note that because there was an update in single audit, you should take into consideration or note the grant dates that are on the grant agreement to determine if the compliance falls under the old OMB rules or the new uniform guidance. Again, as a pass-through entity or maybe as a subrecipient, the grant period and that determines the grant date that determines the whether or not you're testing under the old or new compliance is the original federal award date. So as a subrecipient, if that is not communicated in your subaward, you would want to contact your grantor. In this case, it's the pass-through entity, to get that information so that you can move forward and be in compliance with whichever applicable compliance rule, whether it's the old OMB or the new uniform guidance. And as a pass-through entity, make sure that your agreement encompasses all of the components that we had discussed in the earlier slides in your subawards as outlined by the uniform guidance. So again, here is a snapshot of the uniform guidance. It's Title 2 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, Chapter 2, Part 200. This document is 103 pages, but although it's a verbose document, you can easily find answers to your questions within one document. It's broken up. There's definitions included here, and for me, I feel it's more user-friendly in terms of explaining certain components and parts of a compliance requirement, and you can hit a control find and key in keywords, and it'll just scan through the entire document. The compliance supplement here is the most updated one. The OMB has finally issued the final version of its compliance supplement, and I included a link here so which everyone can have access to. Just make sure that you are using the correct year's supplement. If you are auditing a prior year single audit, then this may not be the appropriate compliance supplement to utilize. So when accessing the website above, the OMB has graciously divided the supplement, which I have to say it's 1,500 pages. The website, it divides it into its different parts, and the website also gives you an option of downloading the sections as a PDF or a Word doc, and I thought that was helpful. So I want to go over just certain parts of the compliance supplement that you'll find helpful. Part 3, what Part 3 has, it's a two-part section in which it provides the guidance on how to audit under both the old and new rules. So if you have a grant program that has and you receive 2 grant agreements, both grant agreement, one falls under the old and one falls under the new. The compliance supplement has both information which allows you to understand how to audit under both rules, and that's under Part 3. So anything under the old OMB, you'll want to use Part 3.1. And anything under the new, you'll want to use under Part 3.2. And again, this is something that we as auditors also utilize. And here's just an example of what these parts contain. So Part 4 is called the agency program requirements, and under Part 4 it breaks it down in, and lets you and tells us that there are 4 program requirements that are subject to testing. So then the first one is the program objectives. What is the CDBG program's objective? That's just an example. And the program procedures, and also thirdly, the compliance requirements. The third point here under compliance requirements is the most important. I feel that as auditors, we use this and as a base for our auditing. It's broken up into 5 parts. We test under the activities allowed or unallowed, and I also noted the section here for your reference. The eligibility. The eligibility in this case, an example would be under Section 8 housing. There's a lot of housing income testing that needs to be done, and so therefore you would under this program you would need to determine what applicant under Section 8 will be eligible to benefit from the Section 8 funding. Matching, level of effort, and earmarking, that's another section here. Reporting, there are elements that, other than your quarterly or annual report, that are required. There is this HUD Form 6002 that is required, that's under this compliant requirements that needs to be filed. And there are also special tests and provisions that may not be indicated in the grant agreement, but here in the compliance requirement. And so it's good to know what these special tests and provisions are. And there's also other information. So on the website, under Part 4, it's also broken out into the different federal agencies. So if you want to only locate your Department of Transportation compliance requirement, what the website does, it breaks out into the, like I said, into the different agencies. So you can only just download the Department of Transportation section. You don't have to go through the 1,500-page document. Any questions?
Okay, I have a question here that is not directly related to the compliance supplement, but it's asking about back to the SEFA again. So it says that basically it says that for the that the SEFA amount been less than 500 each year, do I still need to submit an exemption letter every year? And for now, I'm going to not talk about it because after Nikki is going to discuss it. So what I have here is another question here that talks that refers to the uniform guidance. So basically, it says that the CFR 200 uniform guidance has a lot of changes, and what are the areas of emphasis for 2015 that we need to know? So basically, I think this question was also asked in our earlier session. So basically, you're correct. The CFR 200 is a huge document. There are quite a few changes in there, but from the seminars that we have listened to, the emphasis for fiscal year 2015 is, if applicable, basically the subrecipient monitoring and subrecipient risk assessment activities. So I think those are the 2 big areas. I think that's all I have. Back to Nikki.
Okay, so there are other things to consider when preparing for the single audit. One of it being addressing your findings, and ensuring findings both prior and current year have been addressed immediately as soon as it has been discussed. So what I always tell my clients that if you received a prior year finding last year, you don't have to wait until we come back the next year to see to fix it. I always suggest one, fix it when it has been discussed. If we can maybe document at the end of the report that the finding has been addressed and noted, and also provide these responses to management and to your auditors timely, and make sure that there's responses that lets the readers know that that things have been implemented to prevent issues from occurring. Also, other things to consider, and like I mentioned before in the beginning of the session, is to ensure that your SEFA has an accurate presentation. Make sure that your program expenditures ties to the general ledger. And at a minimum, I know, depending on your financial system, that your one program doesn't have one GL account. At a minimum, provide a reconciliation of that general ledger to show that each program expenditures are tying. And then another emphasis to complete and have complete and accurate records. For example, your reimbursement requests, your monitoring reports, the expenditure detail, just things of that nature. And continued communication with your external auditors, and I'd like to add here your grantors. If one is not sure of how to comply for to one of the requirements on the grant agreement, or if there's a procedural question, it doesn't hurt to pick up the phone or email your auditors or grantor and ensure that whatever question you have is answered. So by the time that we come and audit your program, that you've addressed everything. So another part of the single audit is the data collection form. And what this is that it's a form that the auditee shall submit, which states that whether the audit was completed in accordance with its part, and provides information about yourself, it's your federal program, and the results of your audit. As auditors, also, we can help assist you with this form, but again, it's ultimately the auditee's or management responsibility that this is submitted timely and accurately. The state controller's report, what is that? Well, this is a required submission for all those who have received and expended federal grants, but there are 3 ways in which you can submit this report. So first and foremost, if your expenditures for the fiscal year are less than $500,000, and please note that this $500,000 threshold is for fiscal year 15. Remember that beginning fiscal year 16, the threshold increases to $750,000. So if your expenditures are less than the threshold, you must submit a written notification of its exempt status to the CSO. I'll show you an example of a letter that we provide our clients. Again, it's just an example. So another criteria you may fall under is if your expenditures are equal or greater than the threshold, then you can either if the expenditures are equal to or greater than the threshold and doesn't have any state pass-through funds, then you can either submit the audit report or an explanation letter to the state controller's office. But if you are currently being monitored by the state controller's office, then a no review letter will be issued to you in return. And lastly, for expenditures over the threshold, you must complete a single audit report package and submit it for review. The reporting packages are reviewed on a first in, first out basis. So you may ask what is needed in this reporting package. So there's 3 parts to it. The first part being 1, your single audit report, 2, your financial report, and then 3, your management letter, the management letter. So I talked about providing an exempt letter for those that have expended less than the threshold amount, and this is what we have as an example that we provide to our clients. It just says, if you note the body of the email, it just notifies the CSO or the state controls report that you didn't expend any federal amounts that are equal to and less than the threshold, and therefore no single audit was required. And that's just basically it. You want to cover your basis rather than just not providing anything to the state at all. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's session. I hope today shed some light on how to better prepare for the audit and your auditors when they come and test the single audit programs. Again, in order to obtain CPE credits, I've provided a link in which you can fill out and submit to us. We can provide you the certificate, and it takes about a few weeks, but we will send that to you. Are there any questions regarding any of the items that we discussed?
Okay, I have a question here. So the question is, my SEFA amount for every year is less than $500,000 every year. Do I still need to submit the exemption letter every year? So the answer is yes. So basically, per the instruction on SCO's, the State Controller's Office website for single audit, it spelled out clearly that if you do not, even if you're not subjected to single audit requirement, you have to send them a exemption letter every year. So you can use the our illustration exemption letter as an example and use that format, or you can use your own words. So basically, yes. So basically, what we have advised every year to the city, to all the cities, is that every year you either send the exemption letter or you send the single audit reporting package. You just have to remember that when you send the reporting package, you have to send all the 3 items, because we have had before where the cities sent only the reporting, the single audit report, and SCO kind of rejected it and came back to us for the financial report as well. So the 3 items are basically the single audit report, your CAFA or your audited basic financial statements, and your management letter. Your management letter is the your SAS 114 letter, or sometimes MAIS, we call it Memorandum on Internal Control. So so I think that's the last question that I have, and I think that's it. Back to Nikki.
Okay, so we have some upcoming classes if you'd like to participate. Again, it's at no charge, free to you. The next class is scheduled August 19th, 2015 at 10 a.m. and it talks about why does our audit include an information system review. I always say, and I always tell my clients that ask about why we're doing an information system review. Personally, this ISR is a different language, and so it's good to know what is involved in an ISR. Our second class is dated September 2nd, 2015, also at 10 a.m., and it talks about tips and tricks to avoid financial fraud, and I think this will be an interesting class for all to participate and listen in. So again, you can sign up on our website, www.maisassociates.com, and again, it's free. And thank you very much for participating in today's session 2 of the Single Audit Update. Thanks. Bye.